There's a ton of noise out there. So how do you get decision makers to pay attention to your brand? Start a podcast and invite your ideal clients to be guests on your show. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to Why Podcasts Work. Today we are joined by Elena Hassan. Elena is the Demand Generation Manager at Currencycloud. Elena, welcome to the show.
Hi, Jonathan. I'm happy to be here.
It's great to have you on the show. Elena and I actually go back quite a ways now that we've known each other. So it's fantastic to get you on the show. It's fantastic to talk to you about your podcast, Payments Innovation. And Elena, maybe you can tell us then, you can share with our listeners a little bit about your podcast, kind of what it is that you talk about, and then also where you have started to see the biggest benefit coming from.
Sure, absolutely. Well, like you've mentioned, me and you started working together, I think over a year ago at this point.
Yeah,
And so we decided to have a podcast as an additional channel, as an additional marketing channel. And we've launched our Payments Innovation podcast just to kind of get the conversation going around a fintech, a digital industry, banking, and all the innovations that are happening right now in North America and fintech industry, just because we are a fintech and we do cross-border payments and enable other cross-border providers to do the same. And since we've launched, we've seen a huge amount of just positive sentiment on social. We get fan mail for our hosts here and there where people kind of just, it was very surprising, I think, at the beginning, where we thought we are a niche type of market. And we were thinking, it's probably people who are in fintech or maybe digital banks who would be interested in the topic. But just putting it out there and seeing the response from the audience was great. People do reach out. People actually subscribe. They do listen. And if they like an episode, they reach out to a host directly and just thank them for shedding the light on certain topics. So I think, again, initially we started it as a marketing channel, as a marketing tool, and hopefully in hopes that it would, again, bring some ROI and add to the bottom line a little bit. But seeing just how it positively reflected on our brand, on our host's personal brand, has been amazing.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, the company brand, the host personal brand, I know you had mentioned a little bit before when we were talking about building relationships, with the industry and with prospects. And another thing that you had sort of briefly touched on is this idea of ROI. Was there anything additional that you could sort of shed some light on in terms, because ROI is one of the things that people want to talk about almost right away when they are discussing the idea of having their own podcast.
Yes. And again, exactly. It's a commitment. You have to commit some budget to it and some resources to kind of just make sure you manage it and it's a part of what the team does day to day. So we sold it to the management, but saying, in terms of return on investment, I think we haven't necessarily seen some brand new lead come in as a guest and quickly close. But this is just purely because of the way our business is. Our sales cycles are longer than a regular company would have. Sometimes they take up to a year. Sometimes they can take up to 2 years to close a certain deal. Because again, we work with startups that do go through the sales process faster, as well as banks, and those go through the sales process much slower. But where we found a lot of value, and again, like you can't really put a dollar sign to it necessarily. But like I mentioned, some of our clients, let's say banks or digital companies who don't necessarily want to do a case study, let's say, and reveal their numbers or kind of show that something in their process was broken, and they started working with us to fix it. So the way we started using a podcast, inviting some of our clients on the show, and it turned out to be a very non-intimidating way to get them to talk about the pain points that they see in the industry, to kind of explore a little bit how to solve those pain points. And when you have this conversation with your client or your prospect, most likely some of these, ways to solve their pain points aligns with your solution that you're trying to sell to them. And that's how we kind of recorded a few episodes and then use that almost as a sales tool, having our sales team share it with other prospects within the same segment and basically position it as here's how your peer in your industry is battling the same issues you're facing. And obviously it's very not a salesy way to have a conversation or to have this almost a case study, like 15-minute conversation with somebody who wouldn't necessarily commit to have a full-blown case study with us. So again, we've kind of used that as almost a sales tool in this way, and armed our team with this content, and they've seen great success.
I love that. I mean, it's, you've taken the podcast and you've used it as a learning tool internally. And so you've actually collected information, and you've been able to then take that and use it to help train your sales team, make them all more effective. I love that.
Absolutely. And if you think about it, again, it's more along the lines of providing more value for all of us. Knowledge sharing the information makes the whole industry and all of us a better place. And it's all this information is not readily available, right? You can't just Google anything you want and find it if you are in a niche market trying to solve for one particular problem. And that's why we kind of like brought it all together, and having these people openly share some of their challenges and some of the solutions that they came up with in a very non-threatening way, very friendly way. We even had a couple of our prospects who were on the podcast came back to us very happy, and they said they have been using their own episode actually for their promotional services.
Oh, wow.
Even for like investor pitches, where they were had instances where they couldn't kind of describe what they do well for others to understand, and they just forwarded the episode where they explained it to us and just kind of explored the topic a bit further, and it worked like magic. So
that's great. I love that. I don't think we've had anyone on the show that's sort of described it in that way, with the guests taking their particular episode and using it as a resource. I mean, obviously we know that it happens, but I love the fact that you've mentioned it, that you've seen it firsthand. And, you have talked about this idea of sort of sharing knowledge. And not only I think that has that happened for you and the Currencycloud team internally, but I know there was also another unexpected benefit that you've seen from the podcast in terms of sort of thought leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are an established startup. We are headquartered in UK. However, the US side of the business is relatively young, and the US in general, we do tend to be sometimes a bit in a bubble. So we have been trying to grow our brand identity here in North America and try to become a thought leader or recognized as a thought leader, on different events or participating in different conferences. And again, when we started the podcast, becoming a thought leader wasn't necessarily our number one reason for doing it, but just hearing the sentiment and the feedback from the people that get back to us or listen to the podcast and decide to share their feedback, they do recognize us now as a thought leader. They reach back to us asking to appear on another episode, especially, let's say, around a big conference, because they'd like to align themselves with us and participate and again, maybe share some new insights with our audience. It's definitely, I think, raised our profile as a company and as a brand and as a kind of team that is here but knows what we're doing and understands the industry really well. I think we've seen a huge increase of that kind of feedback.
That's wonderful. I love to hear that. Obviously makes me feel good. So I love that's been the response. That's been your experience.
Yeah.
Elena, one last question. What recommendations then do you maybe have for a company looking to start their own podcast?
Sure. So I think when we were first researching, we knew we wanted to do a podcast, but we weren't sure how to do it. So I think I was fortunate enough to stumble on your website and do a bit more research and decided to go with kind of a full service podcast production option. And I haven't regretted it, not for a second, just because because before you have it, it feels like, well, all you have to do is just record an episode, have somebody edit it and upload it somewhere so it appears on my site and on the player. Mm-hmm. However, just kind of witnessing all the behind the scenes and being the approver on some of the things, I see how much work actually goes in there. From, all I have to do is send a list of potential guests that we'd like to invite, or maybe even point to a conference or the direction where we think potential guests could be. And my job is done. And then after the fact, just to promote the actual live episode, there's so much work to be done on a day-to-day basis. It's all the coordination and production and post-production and making sure that all the technology on the background works properly and displays everything properly, and writing the content based on these episodes. Again, there's so much that goes into it that it could potentially become few people's full-time job, which I'm assuming it's your team's job. And us being a startup, and especially more of a startup in the US, we are a lean team. We don't have the luxury of having few people dedicating full-time to podcasts. So yeah, it's otherwise I don't think we would have continued this initiative if we didn't have anybody do it to the extent that Sweetfish Media team does it. I think we may have stopped after maybe episode 15 and just realized that it's just too much of an undertaking. So again, I think if your team is small, like with any marketing team, seek access to an agency who specializes in doing it. And it goes for podcasts as well as any other agencies, because you get access to highly skilled people who do this, whose job it is to do this. So you don't have to waste countless hours on the internet trying to figure out how to edit an audio or something silly. So yeah, that's kind of my advice if you were to launch this initiative, is to outsource it elsewhere.
Yeah. Well, and you've seen it firsthand. Like we said, we've known each other for a little over a year. And so you've been through the process. You've seen it from start to, not finish, but start to now, which is fantastic. Yeah. And I love the fact that you've gotten so much out of the podcast and that we've gotten to be a part of that process. So, again, we've been talking with Elena Hassan with Currencycloud and the Payments Innovation Podcast. If you are in the fintech space, if you're interested in that at all, definitely go check it out. We're going to have links to that show in the show notes. And Elena, thank you again so much for your time today. It was an absolute pleasure getting to interview you.
Same here. Thank you, Jonathan.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big 3, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3.
That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.